The Vikings. What would they have been without their ships? This whole period of Nordic history, called the Viking Age, is simply unthinkable without these fantastic ocean-going vessels. Not so long ago, the majority of historians called Viking ships primitive. But at the end of the 50s, something happened which would change that forever. Not far from Copenhagen, this fjord leads to the town of Roskilde, the royal seat of the ancient kings of Denmark. It's very shallow, and it has been necessary to dredge and deepen it in modern times. Here to the south, there's only one winding natural passage, just deep enough for local fishing boats. Long ago, there was another and better channel through these waters. But this old fairway is blocked, and legend says 5 centuries ago, a queen of Denmark, Margareta I, had a ship filled with stones and scuttled here to bar the way to Roskilde for enemy ships. When archaeologists from the Danish National Museum donned frogman suits and dived down to the barrier, they found it was much older than the legend claimed. In fact, from the time of the Vikings. And there on the bottom lay not one, but a whole fleet of Viking ships. In 1962, a fund was raised, enough to wall off the area with steel piles, pump out the water, and excavate this unique historic find. On the bottom, mud. A carpet of sludge that can simply be rolled back. The 2 archaeologists in charge have to make some quick decisions.
You see, what we're faced with here is a completely new type of excavation. Our hands are the most important tool we have, because the ships are filled with stones, and washed between these stones lie incredible amounts of mud and shells. We can excavate on land, all right. We're used to that, and we have 3 years' experience of underwater excavation. But this strange combination of wet and dry, we haven't tried before. You just can't use a shovel or even a trowel with wood so soft. So we have to use our hands and water. A soft jet of water like this can do the job much more gently than any tool.
Gangways are placed across the working areas. It would never do to tread on the wood of the ships. The whole idea is, of course, to get the timber up as intact as possible so the ships can be put together in their original form. But everything has to be described and measured, and each tiny piece numbered. Otherwise, they will never be able to find out where the pieces fit. The pumps work day and night. But while some pumps keep the site dry, others pump water in to sprinkle the exposed wrecks, preventing them drying out and crumbling to dust. The ships have been flattened out of recognition by the pressure of the stones, and it's difficult to imagine what they looked like when they were new.
Then one day it happens, what we dared not hope for. We find the very tip of the prow of one of the ships. This is something of an event, as there's no other ship from Viking times with a completely preserved prow. But here it is, no doubt about it. It's been lying on the bottom, bent to one side under part of another wreck, and it's completely intact. And so, little by little, the measurements are completed, and now we can begin the real job, the raising of the ships. This has to be done piece by tiny piece. It's very difficult and nerve-wracking because we have to be so careful. The iron nails which held the planks together have disappeared long ago, so there's no problem in separating the planks. The problem is the planks are so soft and all the edges have been broken off by the pressure of the stones. Some of it looks like a biscuit soaked in tea. The 5 ships are very different. Even flattened, it's obvious that this one is long and slim, a typical warship. Part of this prow has been destroyed, but it has the same form as the tip of the one we found earlier. That one, preserved in its entirety, is carved out of one massive piece of timber, and it contains all the lines of the ship. Raising the prow, which is nearly 4 meters long, more than 12 feet, is a hard job. Not a single chip must fall off. It's a lovely piece of timber.
Like an island from the past, the excavation site lies in the middle of the fjord. Today, the waters of the fjord again wash over the site. But during a few short summer months, a fuller picture of our Viking ancestors rose from the mud of the fjord. Now in these tanks, there are around 100,000 pieces of Viking ship.
What we do know is these pieces come from no fewer than 5 Viking ships scuttled in the fjord nearly 1,000 years ago. Broadly speaking, we also know which pieces belong to which ship. It was difficult enough to get the wrecks up from the bottom of Roskilde Fjord, but now to the real problem. How can we fit them together again? How can we conserve the wood so it can stand being out of the water? How do we get ships out of this?
After the jigsaw puzzle has been put together, it's time to measure again. Each and every piece has to be traced so that there is an exact drawing of its shape and size, not forgetting nail holes and cracks. This is done on transparent sheets, and great care must be taken to trace exactly vertical, making quite sure there will be no distortions. These tracings are both a safety net and a guide for the next steps. conservation and reconstruction.
Here are two fragments from the same piece of wood. One has been out of the water for 2 days. Although the wood looks fine when it's wet, in fact, internally its structure has been destroyed by the waters of the fjord and by bacteria and fungi. When we look at a fresh chip of wood under a microscope, we see a regular cell pattern with comparatively thick cell walls. In the wood from the Viking ships, we find the cell walls have shrunk and are lying loose in the cells. Or they've been completely washed out of the wood. The fact that the cells are filled with water is the only thing that prevents the wood from collapsing. If the wood is to hold, we have to get the water out without causing any damage and replace it with something to stabilize the wood. To do exactly this, we have found a wax-like substance, a type of glycol, which is stable at room temperature, but melts at just under 60 degrees Celsius, 140 Fahrenheit. So conservation is a matter of replacing the water in the wood with molten glycol. When the glycol in the wood is allowed to cool, it crystallizes in each and every cell, preserving the wood in its original form.
In theory, it sounds easy. In practice, it proves to be a difficult job. It turns out that the concentration of glycol in the conservation tanks has to be raised little by little. Too much glycol and the wood will shrink or warp because water has been drawn out before the glycol has had time to replace it. So during the whole process, it's essential to check the wood regularly to ensure nothing goes wrong. On the whole, there's no trouble with the planks, but the frame pieces of oak won't keep their shape. Frame, beam, knee, keel, and a host of other pieces have to be treated by cold conservation. First, they spend a year submerged in a glycol solution. Then they are lifted, but must still be soaked with glycol several times a day, as they are slowly allowed to adjust to surface conditions. In 1968, 6 years after conservation started, the timbers of the first ship are at last ready to be transferred to the newly built Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde.
By now we have a fair idea of how the ships will look. By placing the tracings of the planks together, we can see from the nail holes how they were fitted. With this information, combined with the drawings of the solid carved pieces, it's possible to reconstruct a number of cross-sections. And then it's no big step to get a picture of the whole ship. But nothing is sure. Only after all the pieces from these 5 very different ships have been fitted together will we know if we're right.
Our museum experts went much deeper into the matter of reconstruction than usual by deciding to build full-scale copies of the ships to test their construction and how well they were able to sail. Both the solid carved pieces and the planks have a resilience that we don't find in wooden ships of today. The 900-year-old Bayeux Tapestry may give us a clue. Here we see William the Conqueror ordering the building of a fleet of Viking ships to invade England. The main tool is the axe. They didn't use saws. Could this really make such a difference? Today, of course, oak is cut by a power saw. This means the saw cuts through the medullary rays of the trunk, with the result that modern planks have a tendency to split. In oak, the medullary rays radiate from the core of the tree and reinforce the tree in much the same way as the transverse layers in plywood. The Vikings split or cleaved their oak along the radial lines towards the center of the tree. By doing so, we are able to exploit the full strength of the wood. First in half, then a quarter, an eighth, and so on. With the increasing use of the saw in the Middle Ages, in Denmark the technique of cleaving was forgotten. Not even a description survives to tell us how it was done.
A cleaved plank, half the thickness of a sawn plank, is just as strong. It's only 2.5 centimeters thick, 1 inch, and thinner towards the edges, but incredibly elastic.
Here is one of the oak ships about to be reconstructed. See how thin the planks are, thanks to the cleaving technique. This is a light, slimline ship, a warship designed for 26 oarsmen.
A Viking ship is like a pea pod. If the keel is laid wrongly, for instance, too curved, then both the prow and the stern will rise, and the sides will bulge outwards amidships. Or if the keel is too straight, the opposite will happen, and the sides will cave inwards. The frames are left to the last. Their job is to stiffen the ship, but not so much that it loses its resilience.
There are many joints, but also many cracks caused by conservation. But it's fantastic that it's at all possible to reconstruct these ships. Not only has it demanded technical imagination, but also infinite care and patience from everyone working on the project. It took more than 20 years to piece together and to present the 5 ships now on show in the Viking Museum in Roskilde. It's not an oversized rowing boat, it's a highly sophisticated vessel. Thanks to these vessels, the Vikings held the island realm of Denmark together. Thanks to these vessels, the Vikings set out to discover the world and, for better or worse, contributed to the making of it. In their own way, the ships tell us about long ago. They unfold a much richer picture of the people most of us only know from legends of great deeds and misdeeds.